So yes, if you hear any fire, stand up and walk out. And as my good friend Matt Parker says, the only exception to that rule is if you yourself are the thing that's on fire. Okay, that's important to just make sure we're starting the day with clear definitions, isn't it? Okay, so welcome to all of you. This is a really important day for the IMA. So thank you so much to all of you for being here, because of course it is our 60-year anniversary. Not just 60 years of the IMA though. This year also marks 100 years since Sir James Lighthill was born. And later on we are going to hear from Sir Bryan Thwaites, who was a very good friend and colleague of Sir James Lighthill. I should tell you, actually, James Lighthill was my effectively research grandfather. So is that such a thing? I mean, I was sort of thinking of them as families. So his PhD student, Professor Frank Smith, was my PhD student. And so that means that I've sort of grown up in a mathematical sense, hearing all of these stories about how he could physically see fluid just by looking at the equations, which he put to use braving the waters of Sark. Also, apparently, he was very good at memorising the names of other academics. So if anyone ever asked him a tricky question during one of his talks, he would immediately answer with their name and recite back to them some quotes from their own academic work. Just how intimidating. No pressure, Sir Bryan, but we are expecting the same from you later, okay? Because this is a very big anniversary, I decided to take a little look back, because of course the world was a very different place in 1924. So I had a little look through the history books. In 1924, there was a big explosion in technological advances, meant that people were concerned for the future of their jobs. The Olympics in France had just been and brought this moment of international collaboration amid a backdrop of increasing geopolitical tensions, and a quite boring, pragmatic Labour leader from a modest background had just got into power, giving everyone the fragile and ultimately short-lived hope that Britain's public services would improve. I mean, plus ça change. I thought what I would do, because it's our 60th anniversary, I thought I would actually look up 1964 too. 1964 also had a new Labour government, also had America promising manned missions to the moon, and the best estimates in 1964 were that nuclear fusion was just 20 years away. So there you go. Now try and tell me that history isn't sinusoidal in time, right? Okay, so on to today. A huge thank you to all of the volunteers and the staff for organising this extremely slick agenda that we have for you today. Also, thank you to the Smith Institute for sponsoring the ECM panel sessions that we have a little bit later on. Today, we are also launching the IMA Foundation, which is a new fund for future IMA projects, programmes and strategic investments. And the idea really here is that there is a permanent legacy from this anniversary. And to celebrate it, we've also got some merch you may have seen downstairs. Takes credit cards and everything. We are like properly part of the future. And talking of nothing changing, actually, let me tell you this first. So we've got three amazing speakers this morning. We have Professor Charlotte Watts, we have Dr. Joe Jordan, and Professor Veronica Bowman. And talking of things nothing changing, I know what you're thinking about that lineup. That is a terrible show of diversity, right? And so I am delighted to welcome our token male for the morning, because Eduardo Campillo Feneley is going to announce the winner of IMA in 60 seconds. Thank you very much.
Well, it seems I have one clear role today. So it's my pleasure to announce the winner of the IMA in 60 seconds competition. That was an online competition on social media where people submitted animations to explain some mathematical concept in 60 seconds. I will announce first the runner-up, which is Imoleamide Ayagi from Loughborough, with a video about the golden ratio and the golden spiral. And the winner is Abdul Kahar Sabir from Iraq, with a video about the Mandelbrot set. I invite all of you to go to our LinkedIn and check not just these two winners, but all the submissions, because they are amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so on to our main sessions for this morning. So I should tell you actually that we are going to have a panel of questions at the end. So if you have questions for any of these sessions, just hold on to them, make a note of them, and we will make sure that we get to those at the end of the three main talks. So first up, we have Dr. Jo Jordan, who is a freelance mathematics knowledge exchange specialist, previously as the manager of the Mathematics Applications Consortium for Science and Industry. She led engagement with industry partners, and as manager of the Bath Institute for Mathematical Innovation, she set up a new mathematical sciences knowledge exchange team. She served on the expert review committee for the 2018 bond review and was an impact assessor for REF 2021. Jo is one of the UK's knowledge exchange hub for mathematical sciences KE Super Champions, a recognised technology transfer professional, and a member of EPSRC's strategic advisory team for mathematical sciences. And every now and then, she has some time to sleep. Jo, thank you very much, if you could. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah, for that lovely introduction. So thank you so much for that introduction and also for the invitation to speak today, to be able to share my passion for mathematical sciences knowledge exchange. Okay, the slide is going one forward on this than that, so I'll try and keep up with it. So what do I mean by knowledge exchange? Well, I mean any activity that takes place between an academic partner and someone outside academia, where they collaborate together. And that can be from anything from an undergraduate student project right through to a really large research project and everything in between. So as I said, it's lovely to be here today. A little bit daunting to speak after Hannah, who I've been wanting to meet for years and years. So what do you do when you're feeling a bit daunted? Well, fortunately, Hannah has written up her advice for communicating on the IMA website. And she said, right, a good talk should never start with you. It should always start with your audience. So I'm hoping that you are front and foremost in my talk today. So what does the audience care about, says Hannah? Well, obviously you care about the IMA, otherwise you wouldn't be here today. Brilliant. So let's talk about the IMA and where the IMA is involved in knowledge exchange. So looking at the IMA strategy for the next few years, I was really delighted to see that people and partnerships are right at the heart of it. Because to me, knowledge exchange is all about people and it's all about partnerships. And if I had to have an informal title for today's talk, it would be Maths, People and Partnerships. So today, I plan to celebrate the role that mathematical sciences plays in knowledge exchange, recognise IMA members' key contributions to mathematical sciences knowledge exchange, and you'll see a few familiar faces scattered on my slides. But please accept my apology. If I've missed someone out, it's entirely my omission. And if Ros agrees, I'll write this up as an article for Mathematics Today and make sure that everyone is included. Also have a little look to the future at the end. Gosh, I used to Cox as an undergraduate. I had a microphone then. So if my rowers weren't listening to me, I'd just turn up the microphone a little louder. And if they still weren't listening to me, I'd turn it up again and then they'd get horrible feedback and they'd do as I said. So this slide is just to show some examples of the wide range of sectors that mathematical sciences has an impact on. So it still surprises me, perhaps it shouldn't, this range, because mathematics is a language and you can use it to problem solve almost anything. So from predicting how to make a perfect cup of coffee, to the quality of grains that come out of a silo, to how you reduce battery waste, optimize O-negative blood, and organise ship scheduling. So I wonder if anyone can tell me where these examples are all taken from. I'm looking for Alan or Chris. Hooray! Top marks. They're all taken from study groups in industry. Now, I assume that most of you in the audience know what a study group with industry is, but just in case, I've got a little recap. So this is a really long-standing mechanism for knowledge exchange, which started off in Oxford in 1968 by Alan Taylor. And it was lovely to look up and see that Alan Taylor, along with the president, Sir James Lighthill, who we're celebrating today, were the joint inaugural winners of the 1982 IMA Gold Medal. So Alan was recognised for his huge contribution in bringing mathematicians and industrialists closer together. So these workshops bring together mathematical scientists from a wide range of backgrounds to work on real-world problems. The format is pretty standard. It hasn't actually changed that much since 1968. So before the workshop, a short problem description, usually quite qualitative, is drawn up. On the first day, there are presentations from all the industrial partners. Then each problem gets assigned a room for the week. And what follows is group work, intensive problem scoping and solving, and modelling. On the final day, each group presents their results back to the whole group, and then a report is written as a site visit and follow-up plans are made. So a few years ago, Chris Budd, Martine Barons, Matt Bitters, and I thought it would be nice to look back and see what is the essence of a study group, what do people value, why does it work, and what could be improved. Now, Matt, I must apologise that you're a bit Shrek-like there, a bit green. It's really hard to find a photo of you these days, and I don't have your computer skills to turn it back to black and white again. Sorry? Always knew he was an alien. So looking at both the data we collected and some of the qualitative quotes we have there, it seems that people and partnership are key to what people value out of these study groups. So I thought that was really interesting. It would also be remiss of me not to recognise the huge contribution that IMA members John Ockenden and Hilary Ockenden have put in, the hard work they put into exporting this model worldwide. And these study groups now run in 6 continents. I'm still waiting for the one in Antarctica. So these workshops work well. They've been around a long time. There are obviously things which could be improved, such as the follow-up after the workshop and also the diversity. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. But with this model working well, what about other forms of knowledge exchange? Well, back a few years ago, so 9 years ago this month, so David Abrahams, who I'm delighted is this year's gold medal winner, thought it would be time to take stock and see what was working well more generally in terms of knowledge exchange in the UK and what could be improved. And I was really lucky to be part of a working group that Alan Champneys led, which involved lots of blackboards. So we had the problem, the dream, and the solution. I didn't want to put problems on my slides, but generally it was the fact that there's an uneven distribution of mathematical sciences knowledge exchange around the UK, pockets, really good hotspots, and there are people who wanted to do more of this but didn't know where to start. So how can we make more of the good stuff that was going on, that was being led by the mathematical sciences infrastructure, and how could we join things up a bit better? So in case you're not used to reading Alan's writing, I've highlighted what I think are the main points, certainly for me, on the right. Certainly the dream, the power of stories. How can we talk more about the success that maths has in such a wide variety of sectors? How can we have one network, and how can we leverage some infrastructure money to support this? The solution, there were 2 quite lofty aims for mathematicians. One was a report from Bryan from government and learned societies, and the other was, why not launch this in the House of Lords? And everyone thought, oh yeah, it's a good idea. It won't happen though, will it? But Alan happened to be a member of EPSRC's strategic advisory team at the time. And he took the idea to that team, and they all unanimously, a little bit unusual for mathematical sciences perhaps, thought that this was a really good idea and got right behind it. And what followed was a really big milestone in mathematical sciences. It was the Bond Review. This was about 18 months of work, and it involved many mathematical scientists, including lots of members from the IMA. Again, I'm sorry if I've forgotten anybody. And sorry, Matt, that you're green. And there were 2, I think, really big ticket items that came out of this report. One was the establishment of an academy for the mathematical sciences, and the other was a national centre in impactful mathematics. A third one was invest more in the mathematical sciences. Sorry, my slides are spinning on the screen. I don't know if I said a magic keyword or something. So give more money to mathematical sciences. So you think, really big aims, how is this going to land? Well, the report did actually launch in the House of Lords. I've still got my invitation just in case I'm not invited back to the House of Lords again in the future. And then it also resulted in many more months of hard work. Again, lots of members of the IMA were involved. A few of them are pictured there. And it also resulted in a funding uplift. And I don't worry too much about the numbers of millions there. But basically, there were millions towards mathematics invested. Then something else came along in 2020, the pandemic. And you think, oh, well, this is going to be a really big problem for face-to-face knowledge exchange. How are you going to get people together? How are you going to get problem solving done? Well, fortunately, some really driven people got together. So Matt Butchers, Claire Merritt, let's see, you're here, Claire Merritt and Jane Leakes from the Newton Gateway, Dawn Wosley from the ICMS, they're all members from the National Infrastructure, got together with some really key academics, David Abrahams, Alan Champneys, Chris Budd, and Rebecca Hoyle, and founded the Virtual Forum for Knowledge Exchange in the Mathematical Sciences. And they wanted to see how could we continue knowledge exchange during the pandemic? How could we provide mathematical modelling to help with some of these challenges that the UK and the world were facing with COVID? And how could we make sure that mathematical sciences could be involved in planning for recovery from this pandemic? And one of the really novel mechanisms they proposed was a virtual study group. So this was taking the well-tried and tested mechanism of face-to-face workshops and taking them online. And no one was really sure how it was going to work. But to our surprise, actually, the format translated quite well. Zoom breakout rooms, HackMD, Whiteboard Fox, all the technology was there, ready to use, almost designed perfectly for one of these shorter, so it's a 3-day type of workshop focusing on a topic. And this is a photo from the first ever study group. You'll see some key people there, also lots of members of the IMA as well. And in these workshops, these 3-day workshops, we looked at a wide variety of societal challenges. So looking how you could reduce COVID transmission on trains, how could you reduce the waiting list for cardiologist appointments, how could you open up universities again safely, how could you open up large events, and how could you provide food for the most vulnerable. So really important societal challenges. What I think was two particular things that struck me about these virtual study groups is it addressed one of the, I think, challenges that you find with a traditional study group, which is the fast follow-up. Because these results were really needed, reports were written in a matter of days, not weeks and months. And those results were shared with key players in the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, the Joint Biosecurity Centre, the people who really needed them. So the results were able to get out there quickly. I think another thing was the positive, and maybe a little to us at the time, surprising EDI impact that they had. That not only people who wouldn't have been able to commit such a big chunk of time to a face-to-face event could participate, but also, I think probably because of the focus on societal challenges, it attracted mathematical scientists from the whole discipline. So not just your traditional applied mathematics. And I think that was something that was really, really important. So it was lovely that not only was VChems recognised by the 2021 Knowledge Exchange Award from Praxis Oral, the UK's professional society for knowledge exchange, but also Rebecca Hoyle, her really pivotal work in the initiative was recognised by IMA's inaugural Hedy Lamarr Prize too. So what happened after the pandemic? Did everyone just sit back? No, not a bit of it. So David, again, in his coordinating role, got groups of people together to write 2 quite lengthy reports. So one on fleshing out the details from the Big Maths Initiative on the Academy, and the other on fleshing out the details of what a knowledge exchange hub would look like. And these have resulted in these 2 big ticket items actually happening. So funded initially by some of that investment that was secured in the funding uplift to mathematical sciences. So the Academy involves a phenomenal effort by a really large number of mathematical scientists. What my 4-year-old would say, too many to count, if I give. So again, my apologies if your photo is not up there. It's not that I don't recognise your work. What I wanted to say is that the president is a member of the IMA, so is Nigel. Christy, I'm not sure if you are, really sorry if you're not. And 5 out of 9 of the workstream leads are also members as well. So obviously it was a little bit disappointing to hear the news from DSIT recently, but work has not stopped in the Academy, far from it. And it's really lovely to see, again, the community pulling together, recovering from what is a disappointment and making things even better than what it was going to be before. So anything that we can do to help, Nigel, Christy, Heather, just ask. We're all here and we're all 100% behind you. So the Arthur Initiative that's being set up, again, you guessed it, Scientific Director is a member of the Institute of Mathematics and its Applications. And 5 out of 8 of these super champions, so to lead projects in the initial phase, also members of the Institute. You may ask, some of the more observant of the audience, why is William Lee in a green circle? Several reasons. Now, William is not only one of the most mathematically fearless and talented problem solvers that I've ever met. Unfortunately, the university he was working at, the University of Huddersfield, has just stopped running their maths degree. So he is actually open to work. I'm not his agent, I don't charge any fees, but I highly, highly recommend him. So the KE Hub, how can you get involved? Well, the backbone of the KE Hub are 3 communities. So the KE Champions, which is made up of an academic representative from every department across the UK, so giving access to over 3,000 mathematical scientists. A KE Professionals Forum, which I chair, and this is made up of members who work in knowledge exchange. So they're responsible in setting up the projects between universities and external partners. And then the entertainingly named Big Partnership. So the big stands for business, industry and government. And that is currently free to join. And the aims of the KE Hub are to scale up existing knowledge exchange activity, making the most of the expertise and experience of the national infrastructure, to connect people working in this area, to provide support for projects through linked activities, to deliver these activities and coordinate support from beginning to end. So projects really realise their maximum potential. So how can you get involved? Well, there are 2 really easy things you can do. You can join one of the networks if you're a KE professional or a big partner, or you can find out who your KE champion is in your home department. You can sign up to the fortnightly newsfeed, and you can also participate in some events. So there's the virtual study groups and the study groups and their follow-up, and also triage workshops. And if you haven't heard of a triage workshop, they're a little bit like a micro study group. They take place every other Friday morning, just an hour and a half online. Industrial partner presents their problem, a range of mathematical scientists, students, really, really welcome, sign in from all across the country and try and triage these problems and break them down into a future project. The KE Hub also runs lots of training and hopefully today is launching its short project scheme. So this is largely inspired by a scheme that Heather and her team used to run at the KTN for Industrial Mathematics. So it's an internship scheme where students can take 3 months out of their PhD to work on a standalone project from business, industry and government. And look out for many more opportunities in phase 2 of the Hub, which should be announced next year. So just having a little bit of a reflection and thoughts about opportunities for the future. What do I think the IMA should continue? I think it should continue promoting opportunities to get involved in knowledge exchange, right through from when you start your undergraduate degree until you're a really established mathematician, whether that be in academia or industry. I think it does a really good job of recognising and rewarding good knowledge exchange. Maybe let's think about how we could do even more of that, and particularly for early career mathematicians. I know that a number of years ago, there used to be a prize for writing up the best account of attending the BAMC. Why not have a little prize for writing up the best account, participating in a study group, for example? I think the IMA is really a collaborative organisation, should continue doing that. And I think we need to encourage more stories. When I was speaking to Roz about this talk, she said, we really need to give people like Hannah more stories so she can talk about them. She's such a wonderful ambassador for the subject, but we need to give her more material. So let's think about how we can do that. And I would argue that we should not only be providing nice general summaries of the maths that are easily accessible to a wide audience, but stories about the people and the partnerships that are behind this maths as well, because I think that is interesting. I think we should also encourage more mathematical scientists to get involved in big challenges. It was really good to see people coming together to address these big societal challenges during lockdown. Let's do more of this. I think mathematical sciences has so much to offer. And can we explore how to encourage more mathematical scientists to put themselves forward for influential positions? So just looking back at the history, would the bond review have happened if Alan hadn't been on the strategic advisory team for EPSSE at that time? Would the bond review have landed and secured the funding that it did if Philip hadn't been on the Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology at the time? Open question. I was hoping to ask Charlotte why she decided to become a chief scientific advisor. Maybe we can ask her in the panel discussion later. But let's have a think about that, about how we can encourage more mathematical scientists to put themselves forward. I'd just like to end with wishing the IMA a very happy anniversary, wishing the ECM committee a very happy anniversary, and also celebrating 100 years since the birth of Sir James Lighthill.
Questions at the end? Okay, just to re-emphasise two things that you said. First, about the academy, I wholeheartedly agree with you that I think the enthusiasm has not dipped. We are indeed, as you quite rightly pointed out, behind everybody in that endeavour. And secondly, yes, do give me all your stories. I'd actually already written down the optimising type O blood, so expect to see that on Instagram in a week or so. Okay, now it looks as though Charlotte may not be able to join us after all today. So I'm going to invite our next speaker, Professor Veronica Bowman. Professor Bowman is a fellow of data science at the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory. She specialises in uncertainty calculation and communication and Bayesian inference. And in particular, she spent many years applying Bayesian methodology and data fusion techniques to real decisions, working with academia to enable decision-making under uncertainty. And recently, she has led the development of the Crystal Cast system, which provides uncertainty analysis and model combination and formed the backbone of the system used to combine academic models for the government response to COVID-19. Her current work focuses on delivering impact from digital twins for defence. So to speak to us on the impact of mathematics in industry and society, Professor Veronica Bowman. Thank you.
Thank you very much and good morning. I echo I'm honoured to be here. There was a bit of why have they asked me? What am I going to talk about? I think why I'm here is because I've effectively applied maths in government for quite a long time. The intro, thank you very much, is kind of the one I put out to go, I actually do maths. I work for government and I do actually do maths. Don't always know what I'm talking about, but I do maths. And I've also gone with what does the audience want to hear? Why am I here? The IMA at 60. I pulled this from the website. The Institute of Mathematics and its applications exist to support the advancement of mathematical knowledge and its applications and to promote and enhance mathematical culture in the United Kingdom, elsewhere, and for the public good. It's quite interesting, I found here, that actually it's mentioning things like culture and the public good. Now, that's not really something that in my undergraduate degree, anyone ever said, you need to worry about culture. I kind of was like, well, I'm kind of more worried about my real analysis, to be fair. But it brings us to, well, what's mathematics for? Now, I did worry in the last talk that it was going to cover my talk, but it didn't in the end, so I'm all right now. I'm going to start with mathematics as a language. Definitely meets most of the definitions of a language, and it allows us to communicate about pretty much anything in the universe, from the tiniest of particles up to black holes. It's enabled huge industrial and scientific advancement. Whether it was done by mathematicians or people using mathematics as a language, it basically underpins modern society. But if it's a language, then it's pretty complex, I would argue. I definitely, towards the end of my undergraduate degree, I'm a statistician, I'll give you that. When I was doing the really complex ring theory, I was going, I'm really not sure I'm following this. It took a little while to get through. it's also something, I would argue, very few people speak fluently. Or very much at all, if we're honest. But if everything in the modern world is underpinned by mathematics, and there's only a few of us that kind of speak it a bit, and very few of us that really speak it well, then the native speakers presumably are in very high demand. We see that. Mathematics underpins a lot of what we do. We tend to rebrand ourselves every now and again. I got told I was a data scientist the other day, and then I was told I wasn't a data scientist, and I don't know. What I do know is I do quite a lot of maths. But it also helps as mathematicians to think about what we're doing it for, and to think about, actually, it's quite creative. Maths is creative, it's inventive, and it's a little bit artistic at times. My favourite vegetable ever. I'm not allowed to take questions, but who knows what that is? It is so pervasive, and yet you start a conversation, and I remember distinctly at the start of my career never telling people what I did, because I would either end up in a conversation that I would kind of go, do you know what, I don't know why we're talking about this, or someone would go, I was really bad at maths at school, and you would go, I don't know where to go from here, right? So given it's a language then, and given it underpins everything in the world, well, why don't people speak this language more fluently? And actually, how do we help them? And I too, similar slide, where's maths used? I actually nicked this slide, my slide, but from a different presentation, one I give to schools. And actually people are used to, maths in physics and space, sort of got that. And then we've got, maths in medicine, yeah, we're getting that, and the imaging and that kind of thing. And climate science, I'm getting that. And then I point up the top now, yeah, maths underpins computers. And then I point at the cup of coffee. And I go, how does your coffee get into the coffee shop? Have we thought about the optimization of the logistics of that? Have we thought about the impact and the modeling of the creation of the coffee? Have we thought about actually how we're optimizing the transport? I too did some impact assessment, and one of the impacts that was being claimed by mathematics was actually we could optimize freight to reduce the amount of emissions, which actually gave us better results in our carbon footprint. That's all mathematics, right? All of it's mathematics. So actually that top right one is probably the key one for me, because it's not just about the big stuff. It's everywhere. Now, there's a problem though. It's a language. Languages are used to create descriptions of things. And our descriptions are generally called models. Now, not all mathematicians create models, but that's generally how we talk. And as a statistician, pretty much my entire career has been about creating statistical and or mathematical and or physical models of something. And we get into a bit of a problem. I've put on the screen effectively a picture of dispersion of a chemical in the atmosphere. The left-hand side is a probabilistic model. The right-hand side is a physics-based model. The right-hand side looks like dispersion in the atmosphere. The left-hand side does not. Right? Don't know why. However, if I want to make a decision, and this is where we get back to the title of the talk, mathematics in society. If I want to make a decision, if I want to protect people and say, get out of the way of the plume, that right-hand side is a bit useless, because actually that's an instantaneous prediction of where that cloud happens to be in space now. But it's still a model, so the actual likelihood that in reality it will be there is, it pretty much equates to almost zero, right? The left-hand side is the probability distribution across where it might be, which is much more helpful, right? Anyone under those colours, get out the way, right? Okay. Apart from the fact then, if I'm trying to make decisions and I have a sensor reading, for instance, on one side of that kind of teardrop shape, that's telling me something about the fact that at the moment it's not on the left, but those two colours are the same. So what does that mean? And what I'm trying to get to you here is that actually mathematical models are complex. They are very different. They need to be used for different things, but they also need to be really thought about when we're trying to communicate. Now, obviously, it doesn't really matter if it's not particularly a useful kind of thing. It also doesn't matter if it's a useful thing, but if it goes wrong, it just kind of pours water on my floor, like my washing machine. There's maths in that. I'm not going to like it if it pours water over my floor, but we're probably all right. It does, however, matter if my models are predicting the impact of a pandemic, for instance. Then it matters, right? It really matters that whatever we're saying is right, in some sense of the word right. And what I think we miss as mathematicians, because actually we like exact things, that's why I did maths and not English, right? I'm like, what do you mean I got 70%? I told you all the answers, right? In maths, if I got them all right, I got 100%. But we can never be certain about the real world. So we need to change what we're thinking about when we're saying accurate. What we actually mean is we've encapsulated and are stating our uncertainty, right? I had a chat with a quantum physicist the other day because apparently they'll give us accuracy, and they said, yeah, we can definitely properly represent exactly what's happening on a scale of about 100 molecules. And I went, it's going to be a little while before we get to I don't know, a tank, isn't it? It's just a little while. So we've got uncertainty here. And as mathematicians, we know this, right? We understand this. People don't, though. And yet, in kind of government and society, we are moving up to worrying about really big things. Climate and meteorology, government decision-making, across the pandemic response, across healthcare funding, we optimise that. NICE literally puts numbers against the cost of drugs and quality of life. National infrastructure, national budgets, right? Biodiversity and the environment. And my new kind of thing I've had to move into, this area of digital twins, the safety, the integration with ethics. Suddenly, this thing that is never actually accurate in a way that mathematicians would recognise the word accurate is underpinning all of these really key things. So let's take these things then. Climate science, right? Meteorologists, and I've worked with a lot of them, I've done research collaborations with them, are incredibly good at predicting things like the weather and the climate. Their models are incredibly good. So this isn't about the mathematical models behind meteorology and or climate science are bad. They aren't. They are probably some of the best models, the best examples of integrating real world data with mathematical models to improve estimates that we've got. And yet we come up with things that look a little bit like this because we've got to translate this into something that's really quick, right? And even worse, these are now on our apps everywhere, right? I don't care which AI you use. My Alexa tells me things like this. Alexa says there's a 20% chance of rain. And then I look out the window and it's raining and I go, well, what do you mean, Alexa, there's a 20% chance of rain? Because it's raining. And actually, I don't know if there's a 20% chance of rain and you're giving me that across a day. Well, what does that mean, that now there isn't a 20% chance of rain next hour? Is there more or less? What are we doing here? I understand that these things are probably correlated, but I don't, and I did look. I do know, I have asked my meteorologist friend, but I did look on the website. I can't find the definition of those percentages and exactly what they mean. So we're then presenting people with data and mathematics and the output of data and mathematics hundreds of times a day in a way that I'm really struggling to understand, if I'm quite honest. And generally I look out the window and go, is the sky grey? Rather than necessarily looking at what that's telling me. If it says 0, I'm like, well, all right then. And then it still rains on me, right? Because actually what we're doing is we're looking at an ensemble forecast, and that ensemble forecast has only got 24 members, and actually probably none of them did capture the kind of random event that it rained. And even if one of them did, the realisation of exactly where that rain is going to fall, for me, it rained 10 miles away from the Met Office. They're going, that's brilliant. I'm going, well, I'm wet. Not brilliant. And then we have the interesting error catching. I was not allowed, I have to clear on my side, so I was not allowed to screen grab the interesting weather that was displayed last week, where it told me that the wind speeds were kind of 14,000 miles an hour. And I went, oh, they really are. So you look at these things and you think, I'm part of a community that speaks this language, and I'm yet giving this language to people and I'm expecting them to interpret when the very simplest things I'm not sure I can. So how are we then going to talk about predicting into the future, which is basically what most people want from mathematics? They want us to go out of what we can actually do and then make stuff up, right? What's it going to do in the future? Well, I can give you a prediction, and because I'm a statistician, I'll give you an uncertainty about that prediction, and I can be fairly sure that it'll be in there somewhere, unless, of course, aliens land, or there is a big emission from the sun, or someone drops a bomb somewhere, or something else. Like, what we're actually saying is, given the assumptions I've made about what the future will look like, and given the model prediction that I am generating, and given the combination of the models, this is what I would expect to happen, right? But the person I'm giving that to, the decision maker, what do they see? What are they interpreting from that? What communication is happening between us? And moving on from this, given that we're trying to communicate, what does that future look like? How am I moving forward? How am I showing that I understand there's inaccuracy here, and that there's uncertainty, and that there is a validation envelope? The amount of times as a government scientist that I give a whole load of caveats, and they go, could you just put it on the bottom of the slide? And then they go, oh, it makes it look a bit messy. Could you put it on the next slide? And then they delete it. Right? It's not helpful. So if you want to do mathematical modelling, there's a whole load of other stuff that goes into that. And then you get to things called digital twins. I've given you the definition. You can probably get the slides elsewhere. I'm not going to go through it. But I say digital twin, and a decision maker goes, that's exactly the same as real life. So I wrote a definition for digital twins for the government, because that isn't the case. It's only a digital twin, so a known and unbiased level of tolerance, if you've done it right, okay? So there must be a validation envelope. There must be an assumption set. How do you define that? It's a digital twin of a car brake system. Unless I drove it into a volcano, then it probably doesn't work, right? It needs to run in the right kind of time frames. Well, it's given me an answer. I can definitely model COVID now. Well, probably not very helpful. These things kind of underpin the conversation that mathematicians need to have. But they also need to think about, as we generate more and more and more complex models, we're using a whole load of power. Do you know how much power a data center uses? I was just speaking to Alistair earlier. He said we might have to nuclear power these. I'm like, okay. Well, let's use this quite sparingly, because you know what? Sometimes a statistical model is all you need. You don't need a digital twin. Do you really want one? And even if you did know exactly where I was at every second of the day, and you could tell me exactly where to go to get round the thing that you think I'm going to do next, do I want you to? Do we need more and more complex models? Or do we need integration? Do we need to understand our data better? Do we need to move forward? Because mathematics and digitization go hand in hand. But computation takes resources. They have hidden financial and environmental costs, and mathematical models only go so far. So how do we start to actually have a conversation with decision makers about the caveats, the assumptions that we're making? And how do we actually embed the fact that we speak this language and not everyone does, right? How do we help them? Hannah does a lot of communication. This is great. People are starting to understand concepts. But as mathematicians, I would flip that round and go, do we understand what we're saying to people? Do we understand when we provide these models what people are going to bring from our explanation? And do we need to think about how we are creating and explaining and delivering mathematical models, and whether we even should in some instances? AI makes life easy, but can we sustain a world reliant on it? If everybody is using it all the time, then we're probably going to run out of carbon pretty quickly, just saying. So the world is dependent on mathematics. We're all mathematicians. This is good. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel like I'm making a difference. It's helped change the world. It absolutely has. But from that kind of societal perspective, do we need to think every time we do a bit of maths about the assurance of that, what people are understanding about it, how we're communicating, the safe use, maybe some of the ethics of climate change, of understanding and modelling what people are doing, of integrating COVID epidemiological modelling with the fact that we don't actually have a model for the impact of lockdown on students' learning. I didn't see a mathematical model on that. But we did have this many people are going to be sick. So we made a decision with maths on one side and some form of judgment on impact on the other that didn't have numbers. Now, I, as a mathematician, know that those two things are valid and you can make that. But if people that don't speak a language are presented with numbers on one side and nothing on the other, what do they understand by that? How are they making those decisions? I'm going to leave it there. Happy 60th IMA. I hope that was of some interest.
Okay, so we have no Charlotte, unfortunately, but we do have an opportunity for some questions for both of our speakers. I should tell you actually, I should tell you that point about having an absurdly complex and sophisticated climate model and then it being reduced down to something like 20% chance of rain. I think that element is so interesting. There was a survey that they did of members of the public a couple of years ago where they asked them what they thought was meant by 20% chance, or 20% chance of rain. And some people got it correct that it was like, if you ran this 100 times, if you ran this 100 times, it would rain 20% of those. Some people thought that across the course of a day, it would mean that it would rain for 20% of the day. Some people thought that the 20% was geographical. So if it said it was going to rain 20% in London, it meant 20% of London would be covered in rain. And my favourite one was that some people thought that it meant 20% heaviness. So like there was essentially 100% meant very heavy rain, 20% maybe a light drizzle. I mean, it does really kind of illustrate the kind of the sort of situation that you're up against. And I wonder, what kind of tools have you picked up along the way in order to translate the models that you understand, the models that you are fluent with people who don't speak the same language?
So there's two ways of approaching that answer. The first one is the best way is to gain a conversation. The problem if you just produce a picture is that you haven't had the conversation before the picture that goes with, this is what you need to understand with the picture. If you can sit down and talk to people first, then you can design the communication about what it is that they need. So that would be the first piece. It's that building a rapport. Because actually, sometimes a picture isn't as good as a number, and sometimes the other way around. And you're left with, so I've had a lot of decision makers go, well, I don't want an uncertainty, give me an answer. So the response to that is, okay, well, I'm going to send you to the horse races, bet on a horse, not going to give you the odds though. And they go, why would I do that? And I'm like, well, you just told me you didn't want the uncertainty. You know, you can, if you put it in language that they understand, which is why the communication is good, if you can understand them, you can build it. Then it's about simplification and pictures, as simple as the teardrop shape we had on the graph. We started out with lines and people thought, oh, if I stand this side of the line, I'm all right. If I stand this side of the line. So we just blurred it. And suddenly they were like, oh, it's a blurry end. So it's about really looking at and working with the audience to understand what it is they're doing. And then it's about simplification. Just simple, 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 simple. What is it you need? How do I give them that? But there's no one size fits all.
Absolutely. But I think it's nice the way that you describe that it's an active translation and collaboration rather than sort of, here I am the authority.
Yeah.
Do you encounter the same things, Jo, with your partnerships?
I was just thinking of a personal example, actually, and how we might be able to talk about this more in schools. So my 7-year-old is quite definite. He's very black and white. I wonder where he gets that from. And recently he started saying to me, are you sure? And I'll say, yes. Are you 100% sure? And I think, well, can you ever be 100% sure about anything? So I think I'd argue that those interpretations of those numbers needs to start really early.
I did hear a rumour actually about one SAGE meeting, so as in during COVID, where a prominent scientist was banging the table saying, "I am 100% sure," and then all the other scientists were like, "Okay, that's we need to take you back to being a 7-year-old mathematician." Okay, questions for our lovely panelists, if we could. Who would like to kick us off on this?
Thanks. Oh, louder than I thought. One thing you mentioned, Veronica, in your talk was that people who are fluent in mathematics are at a premium, and there aren't very many of them. So should we, as a community, be trying to bring more people into the community of fluent mathematicians? A concern I have at the moment, I think other people share it, is that the number of young people going to study mathematics has not increased in the last 10 or so years. It's exactly the same. And yet A-level entries is increasing rapidly. What are we not doing, or perhaps better, what could we do to better enthuse people about becoming the mathematicians of the future?
So it's a great question. And it's also, I think it's a nuanced question, because some of the kind of people coming into degree, well, I want to go and do data science, right? They want to do that. Data science sounds cool, right? So I go into schools and they're like, well, I don't want to do maths, I want to do data science. And I'm there going, well, you're sort of doing the same thing, I'm just saying. So I think there's a lot of engaging people in a discussion of what maths is, the benefit it brings. Did you know that AI is fundamentally underpinned by it? Do you understand what we mean by digital twin? And that's very much about the storytelling and about people getting out there and actually doing those explanations. I think there's an issue in that it seems to be okay in schools to just go, oh, well, it doesn't really matter, when fundamentally it really, really does. Maths is one of the things that you are actually going to have to do. But when I speak to teachers, they don't necessarily understand it either, particularly at primary level, which is when I think it needs to start. That I got in trouble with my primary school teachers. My sons have finished at primary school, but I did get taken aside one day and she said, I had an argument with your son about infinity. And I went, what do you mean? She said, well, he says there's different kinds of infinity. I'm like, oh, you mean countably and uncountably infinite, don't you? She was like, why are you doing this to me? So he was interested, right? I did the whole hotel room example. He was getting it. But there is a lack of fluency, particularly at the area. So what do we need to teach at primary school? What are the concepts that are actually going to get kids excited about the fact that maths is everything, maths is everywhere? And how do we get them past almost the flip of mathematics? So you get to GCSE maths and you get taught equations of the circle. You get to A-level and you go, oh, that's why, right? Or you go, right, this is how you find the bottom of this curve. And oh, now if you do further maths, they'll teach you when you differentiate that you can times it down. And that's good. Let's tell you why. Let's tell you why that works. Kids like why. We know kids like why. Those of you that have had kids will probably have gone through that. Why? And yet we don't say why or what for. And that has to be where we start, surely. But probably you know more than I do, because we could do knowledge exchange with them.
So back to my 7-year-old, I think he only took maths seriously when he started being able to tell the time. But no, I get it. It's useful.
Yeah.
So I think it does start really young. I think I'd say, as well as the fluency and starting young, it's also about branding and the branding of people as well. So how many of the mathematicians that our community train who then go and work outside academia still call themselves a mathematician, or are they a data scientist? I think that's something that we can work more on together as well.
I've got a question sort of specifically about the defence sector, but it also relates to government. I work a lot in that sector, and the senior decision makers are typical sort of humanities graduates, international relations, whatever, but they like to use sort of semi-pseudo-math sound bites. So the current head of the army is saying we need to double lethality within 5 years, but actually no definition of what lethality is or how that works or anything. And in fact, a guy you'll probably know, Tom Coppinger-Symes, was like going, Chris, we need more AI and we need it sooner. I'm like, what do you mean by that? Just deliver it to me. And I'm kind of thinking with the same with government. How do you coach these people to kind of not use pseudo-maths or kind of say this is a bit woolly, and who is doing that job with these senior decision makers?
I don't have the answer to that. Every kind of government mathematician is trying. So, and you do see it, unfortunately. Best practice for the faults of an engine, we ask industry to give us a mean failure rate. And I was like, why are we asking for a mean? Is it normally distributed? What do you mean? Well, why were you asking for a mean? Like, do we know anything? And they were like, well, that's what the book says. And I went, okay, are we going to get standard deviation around this? Because actually, we could have one that breaks after 2 years and one that breaks after 10 years, and you want one that's like in the middle, but neither of those satisfy that. So what is it that you're trying to specify? But it's about a lot of things. It's about continued discussion. It's about honesty from the mathematical modelers, because I think, and I've also been guilty of this, I've just kind of gone, it's a really good model, worked really hard on it, this is definitely the answer, without actually kind of going, let's back up from this. I can't tell you the answer to this. You do need to think, you do need to ask why. And I think it's not necessarily about making everyone fluent in maths, but it's about making everyone curious. Well, what am I asking? I've just made this. If you kind of bounced that back and said, well, do you know what you're asking for? Why? What? Do the why thing, the 7 whys. Why do you want more AI? What do you want to affect? Then you can have a conversation. So there are people trying, but it is easy and people expect sound bites, and there is a lot of pressure and there is not enough time and or money. And actually, it's easier if the book says it, let's do that. So it's going right back to primary school again and making people question and going, no, that isn't right. You need to think, what do you think? How do you want to answer that question? So yes, people are doing it. Yes, that's what a lot of scientists are doing. Does it need to happen more? Yes. Do I know how to make it happen more? No. I don't know.
I might even know. You want to say something? I might just say a couple of things. So I really like that idea of asking people questions when you think that they're not on a solid ground, right? Because I think that that's the best possible way to expose that the gaps in their own knowledge. The book that I'm writing at the moment is about this, basically. It's called No One Knows What They're Doing. And it's basically about uncertainty, because I think that the problem with these pseudo-mathematical phrases ultimately is that it's because people are confusing confidence with certainty. And I think that actually we really need to expose these kinds of stories, right, to encourage a culture of wearing your uncertainty with pride and of actually having humility in your own processes, because I think that having humility in your thought processes sort of has a bad reputation. It kind of like it doesn't feel like the type of thing that leadership demands. But the reality is, we know from science, right? I mean, we know from mathematics, we know from statistics, we know from everything that actually the more honest you are about uncertainty, the better decisions that you make. And I don't think that has filtered through into people who are not fluent in this language, and I really want it to.
You are. Gentleman here had his hand up, but you can't see him.
Hello, thank you for some great talks. Ed Rocher, Chair of the Alliance for Data Science Professionals, among other things. I was wondering about doing school anecdotes. My son, when he was at secondary school, was told by his math teacher there was no such thing as a chartered mathematician. So he had a row with them as well. What I was thinking about was sort of not quite as bad as you have humanities graduates that we were learning about, but other broadly STEM professionals and the impact on their lives we have. So I was chatting to a vet the other day, a veterinary surgeon, who uses machine learning tools to predict cows going lame. And it sounded really great, but the real issue was it turned his business model upside down, because he's normally paid to go along and cure a lame cow. He needs to be paid to keep a cow healthy. And I wondered if in the knowledge exchange journeys that you sponsor, whether the sort of culture change and sort of business model change feature in them, or whether, and if not, whether we as mathematicians should lean into that.
Gosh, that's a really good question. I think it should probably working. No. Okay. Yeah. I think it should probably feature more than it does, Ed, in all honesty, so that it's broader than a particular problem that you might be working on together. So I was at a talk that Heather gave just a few weeks ago when she was talking about all organisations having a mission statement and how mathematicians can get involved in not just the problem solving, but the really high level, looking at how they can really influence and form and help and contribute towards their mission. I thought that was really powerful.
Okay.
I wanted to go back to that question of the uncertainty part and in terms of policy decisions. And I'm wondering how much of a problem do you think it is that the policymakers, politicians don't feel the need to be open about the decisions and be transparent about the kind of the maths and the evidence they're using. You mentioned COVID. We also the epidemiological models. I still don't know what the model the Treasury had for Eat Out and Help Out, and there's that huge imbalance. And I think while we know that not everyone can talk the language, having everything open to public scrutiny so that some of us can look at it and it makes it more accountable feels like that's an important step forward. But even now, you look at bills coming out. I mean, the first bill that came out from the government had a big figure about how much, it was the railway bill, about how much it was going to save. It will create 48 million, not or 400 odd million, not a single calculation inside that. And that seems to be acceptable. So we have the maths, but we don't have the maths.
So I'm going to come back on that a little bit on the basis that I did write the algorithm that combined the academic models into a single thing. And do you know what? I not only had to publish that algorithm and I had to put it on the government website and I had to get it reviewed, but also it was so tight with what I could do that I couldn't come up with something new. The criteria was given. It has to be published research that you are reusing. So as a kind of government scientist, I was given no freedom. Would I have done what I did if they said, come up with something new? Maybe not. But I had to do something that academics had peer reviewed. So I had to manipulate mathematics and publish it and get it reviewed. And actually, there's a sense that before even the Crystal Cast code could be used, Angela McCain had to take it and get it reviewed by 3 senior academics to make sure that it was okay. And that happens across. So I do think that there is scrutiny, there are calculations. What happens is that you then get models that need to be updated, and they need to be updated on the fly, right? So the combination, not so much, but the epidemiological models, these things are changing overnight. And therefore what you've got are epidemiologists, and they were actually academic epidemiologists, that are having to change their models on a daily basis. And month after month after month. So could errors have crept in? Of course, we're all human. But the fact that we had multiple models that we were then combining in a rigorous fashion, I feel made a real difference, because actually it's unlikely they were all wrong all the time, right? So there is mathematics underpinning it. The difficulty comes when I absolutely think what happens is they want to make a statement, because there seems to be this assumption that the public don't like uncertainty. If I say I don't know, I'll look bad. It's exactly as you said, you have to be humble and go, well, no, I really don't know. But there's a flip side to that. And I spent the first half of my career as a statistician going, if I actually properly combine all of this uncertainty, I literally get to, I don't know. But I think I do know something. I know more than saying nothing, definitely. So how do I distill that down? And I think that what we're missing is almost a translation function between the mathematics and the decision. And I don't know what that looks like. But without it, absolutely, they go, and probably a poor civil servant somewhere came up with a model that at some point said something like 48 million and did have an assumption set and did have a validation envelope and did have all of that. And someone deleted it all and then it got retranslated and you ended up with the number will have come from somewhere. And at some point, it probably, because of the Aqua book, was validated in some way, but probably not for that use, right? So that again comes back to that translation piece. So I totally agree, but I think it's about the public understanding that they do quite like uncertainty and honesty and asking for it, and that comes back to education. And then being really clear that, we as a community are not happy unless you tell us why, with what. And it is there, but that review process just needs, I think, continued pressing. Please tell me why.
I think I would just go back to one of my reflections, which is, are mathematical scientists putting themselves forward for influential positions? How many apply for the Royal Society pairing scheme, for example? I would argue not very many.
One thing actually, because at that point about translation, I do think it's important to not sort of just put this all on the non-mathematicians, because I think that the translation problem sometimes happens in reverse. So there's this really nice quote by Danny Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winning economist, and he says that humans have this really they have this habit of taking a really hard question and swapping it for a much easier one without ever noticing that we've made the substitution. And I'm thinking about times when the government has been transparent, for example, the A-level algorithm fiasco. And the thing is, the algorithm itself, I sort of dug into that report a bit. There was a kind of few flaws in it. But, fundamentally, I think that the biggest mistake that was made in that whole system was translating the very difficult question, which is how on earth do you assign grades in a year like 2020, to a much simpler question, which was how do we make this year's grades look like last year's, And I think in that step, in that single assumption that was made in the model, that's where basically everything from there kind of went wrong. And I do think that actually sometimes, as you said, when you make a model as a mathematician, you can be so blinded to the results of your model, the impact of your model, that you can forget that your assumptions are just that. And actually, your model is only true with respect to the assumptions that you've grounded it on. So I think it's a translation in both directions. Yeah. Humility. Absolutely.
I think I was due to be next, Hannah.
Oh, where are you?
And then there's someone over there.
So sorry.
Right. So Nigel Campbell, Chair of the Academy for Mathematical Sciences, we are still here. We will still be here. Thank you for all the affection and messages of support. I spent my career for my sins also in government, a slightly different bit from Veronica. I'm not a proper professor. I was working in the Treasury, the Cabinet Office, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, things like that, as a statistician originally, then as an economist, and occasionally as a policy advisor. But I always really need to come back to something more technical if I did too much policy. I think I just want to talk a bit about this, but the question for you is, if you have a limited number of mathematicians, and if you have a limited number of people who are really, really good at maths, but also a limited number of people who are good at really numerate, where would you put them? Where do you want to put them in the translation function as a statistician, economist, scientist? You've got some choices, but we've got limit. But we should increase every group. With that question in mind, I've got a few sort of stories. The first of which is, you're absolutely right, but it wasn't a mathematician who made the assumption that said you should have the same grades as before. That was a political choice by, I don't know if he understood he was making the consequence of his choice, but it was Boris Johnson and Gavin Williamson. And they made the decision that we shouldn't let this nice thing happen to these, unkind thought. And they didn't ask the question, was it possible to not stitch people up? Examples of other things, the quality. Sometimes I saw excellent mathematics and excellent science informing decisions. And sometimes you just bang your head about the quality of it. A prime minister who doesn't understand that 4% and 0.04 are the same, and who needs, I'm sure there are better uses of Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty's time, and the humanities graduate who is Simon Case, the cabinet secretary, to explain these things. I think they sometimes have this sort of, I'll do words, but basically, I found economists and other analysts were treated as their models were either treated as garbage or regarded as perfect. There was no middle ground, even the middle ground we were trying to translate to people and explain to people. The caveat thing I always find different, because it does make the slide messy. I think blaming my own profession and my own behaviour sometimes, some caveats don't matter. I've used the best ONS series when I could choose between two. We should tell people like ourselves, we should open this up to scrutiny. Minister, this assumption matters, and you get a different recommendation based on whether you think this is happening or that is happening. And you had that a lot in COVID. Those ones we'll talk about, not here's a complete list, which would beat a peer-reviewed standard. I think the translation mechanism is really important, and I just wanted to do a little outrageous caricature. So what you have is policy people who know that their ministers want. So you've got ministers and special advisors. Well, you can guess who they are. They do want to get elected again. That is their quite driving force. Then second, you've got policy officials who think that they ought to make their minister happy, and that's why we've got Eat Out to help out. Someone was told, go and get the economy bigger than it otherwise would be. Nobody said this is good in any cost-benefit sense. So you have these people who, can you give me an answer? You know all the detail, tell me the one answer preferably, because at least, journalists do say, so you don't know what you're doing. Well, if you say the number might go up, but it might go down, yeah, of course. But if you say, I can see the structure of a pandemic and how it'll come and the ways in which you would do it, and data, not dates, that's a appropriate thing. So, but is there a single answer? They don't tend to have the skills. If you can get mathematicians in that role, brilliant. But there are few enough around. But there's a really good role for us. And then analysts who feel a bit browbeaten by, can't you do it faster? And at the other side, we've got academics who are saying, can't you do it slower? Don't you realise? And behaving exactly the way you do. And that's a terribly awful caricature to encourage people to think, how do you make each of those better? And how do you make the relationship better? And how do you get in the room? I got junior statisticians into number 10 so they could see the people concerned. That was rare. When I started in one job, the analyst sat quietly while the other people described both the policy and the analyst element of it. And they were there to answer hard questions. That didn't last long, but it's an outrage. And there are plenty of places in government which are true. So I just want to leave with a couple of anecdotes. The first is, you may remember Chris Grayling. He's got a peerage now for services to God knows what. One of the fiascos was caused because the start of the conversation about how to take probation forward was started with, it shall be privatised, and now what? You'll remember his ferries and contracts. But a third one was the work programme. He was the Minister of State and DWP, who had a quite good idea that you should have an incentive. It's not a perfect idea. You should have an incentive. You should measure whether people get in jobs and stay in jobs, and firms will be paid based on their success rate. It was ruined by people not understanding how a denominator may change over time. I will explain over time, but there's too much. I want to let people get on. I'm just stuck that the quality sometimes is so bad, and the quality other times would be just such improved by thinking. The denominator in this case was the number of people who are going to employment firm X in 3 years' time. And that will be much less the number now. So when the numerator, which is number of people who are getting into a job and have been there for 6 months, well, that'll be later. If the denominator's fallen, you'll all look good. So they all got paid more, and you couldn't, even though we knew which were worse, we couldn't deal with it. So where would you like to put the mathematicians, given the quality varies between wonderful and awful.
Thank you.
That question to me. It's quite a sweeping question. I think it depends on the mathematician. That I've worked with amazing mathematicians, and I cannot follow the maths that they work, and I would put them in front of a decision maker 0 times. There's also really, really good communicators. David Spiegelhalter, I once watched him speak, and he doesn't talk like, he wanders round. I was like, this is revelation. He literally demanded that he could wander around as well. So it depends on which mathematicians you're giving me as to where I want to put them. But do you know what? I think the fundamental thing that we don't value in this country are teachers. They do such a hard job, and they do such an important job, and a job that I quite frankly couldn't do. And I think I'd put them all in schools. That's where I'd put them.
My year one son who wrote 4 minus 8 minus 4 big X. Can we do this? Something like crushing a little bit of
Okay, I think we have time for 2 brief questions. Let's not. You haven't had a single female question.
Hello, hopefully this is a quick question. I was really interested in what you were talking about uncertainty, and also kind of mentioning about ethics as well. And I was thinking, what do you think is the impact of the sort of initiatives around equality, diversity and inclusion on improving our understandings of uncertainty and how we construct our models?
It is a good question. And it's also a really hard question. So I don't like the fact that we're trying to quantify it all, because it feels like an unquantifiable thing. So the RSS are doing some work with EPSRC looking at the impact of ED&I kind of across the board, but the data's rubbish, or we can't get at it because it's identifiable, or it can't be released because of so actually thinking about people aren't numbers. People have numbers, they have lots of numbers, but they aren't numbers. I think we have to get away from that numeric. But what I do see, and what I have seen, is the more diverse thinking you can get in a room, the better the outcome that you get. So, and that's not just about like gender or ethnicity or sexuality. It's about background and experience and training. The more diversity you get, and the more confidence people have to go, what were you talking about? That, I think, is the key thing that we can do.
There's a couple of short points, believe me. Excuse me. In terms of the translation, sorry, Stephen Castell, independent consultant. I think the mathematicians need to be involved in a new sitcom, something like a British version of the Big Bang Theory. I mean, we did have the IT crowd, but we now need to have something like the AI group or something. I don't know whether some producers are working on. Yeah, but I mean, every physicist wanted to get onto it and explain it. And if we had the same thing for mathematicians here in Britain, I mean, our president, is doing some good work with Dara O'Brien, but it's on the radio. We need it on prime time television. So that was just a quick point. But in terms of... Oh. I don't get time to watch prime time television. I just make acerbic comments on it. I don't actually watch it. No. But in terms of the talk we had about the climate mathematical models, I do recall that when I first heard about them back in 2003, 2004, I mean, they have a much longer history, the ones that got all the attention were developed by some specialists in, I think, a Dutch university originally, who were not actually mathematicians. They were geographers, climatologists. And I got in touch with them and said, can you tell me about your model? Are you taking into account diabatic flow, i.e. gas dynamic flow with heat addition? And they came back and said, oh, no, we can't do that. Quote, unquote, the mathematics is too difficult. I said, no, it isn't. Consult my 1972 prize-winning PhD at the University of Nottingham. You will find simplifying, well, like algorithms, but mathematical algorithms, which will assist you in modeling diabatic flow, because that's one of the fields I worked on. Whether they did or not, I don't know. They said they were going to get a copy of it. But my point is, you did make the statement, the climate models are some of the amongst the best mathematical models we have. You will know that many mathematicians would challenge that in the maths community, not just in the conspiracy theory people outside. I just wanted to know, just since 2003, 2004, because I haven't actually followed in detail the models, to what you mentioned about having to develop the model constantly, to what extent do the current ones are out of the world compared to those original ones, that enables you to be quite confident in making that statement, please?
So it's night and day, and they're being improved all the time. It's always difficult to say things like the word best in a group of mathematicians, isn't it? What I think they do is reflect the whole world, and they try not to make, let's assume the world is flat kind of assumptions that we are all kind of guilty of as mathematicians. They have an appreciation that they need to reflect the world. So yes, mathematics can always be improved. If you're running on a global scale, though, and you've got a supercomputer that is a certain size, you literally can't put in as much as you'd like. So sometimes it's not necessarily about whether the mathematical model is good. It's about, have I got enough compute to run the mathematical model that I want to run? And then it's kind of about backtracking, because the thing about mathematical meteorology is that it's nudged by the data. So if the model doesn't fit, they nudge it. And that nudging, then, as we learn more physics, has to be backtracked out, because then you're like, well, I've got more physics, but now it doesn't fit. So actually, I think when I say best, what I'm saying is they're responding to the real world, and they are not making kind of simplifying assumptions that mean they don't fit the real world. That's why I say best. Are they accurate all the time? Well, can they be accurate? No, not unless you build another world. It was.
But as a digital twin, I mean, it is phenomenally sophisticated.
Yeah. They are very sophisticated, but we're never going to be accurate unless you go back to Douglas Adams and, well, if you want the answer to the life, the universe, and everything, you just need to build another world, right? We can't do that. So they are, I think, the best at going, we need to be close, we need to pay attention to the data, and we can't make simplifying assumptions.
Well, that brings our time for our panel to a close. Join me, please, in saying a big thank you to Joanna. Just before we go off to lunch, we have a very special presentation for you, because I would like to invite Sir Bryan Thwaites and Professor David Abrahams to the floor. Sir Bryan is going to give us a little talk, followed by David Abrahams. If I can hand over to both of you.
Bit impromptu, I'm afraid. Yeah, Dave. Hi, Bryan. Nice to see you. Come and sit. Okay, so hello everybody. I'm David Abrahams. I've already had a few plugs today, thanks to Joe. Thank you very much. Remember who I am. It's a great pleasure to welcome Sir Bryan here. He's been a stalwart of the IMA ever since its inception, and we're celebrating his 100th birthday as well as Sir James. So a round of applause. So I'm going to make a little presentation, which was going to be a speech at the lunch, but I'm going to do it there in a minute. But I'm going to do it, but I'll let you sit back down there in a few minutes, if okay. But I just think Sir Bryan was the right-hand person to Sir James all through the conception of the institute, or an institute which brought together mathematicians from industry and academia. And Sir Bryan helped bring it through to a successful creation, and continued as the second president, as we all know, and then throughout its life, the 60 years, has been involved to one extent or another. So thank you amazingly for your contributions to the IMA, but also for your broader contributions to the mathematics community and all you did for maths education, and also, of course, in your role in Southampton. So I think I'd like to get us all to say an amazing thank you and birthday wishes on your centenary. And I'll wonder if you would like to say a few words in response. So thank you very much.
David, thank you very much. Can you define few?
You're allowed to indulge yourself.
No, he's mentioned, of course, it's impossible not to mention James Lighthill, who is my lifelong friend from school days onwards. And I, being here now, cannot but do anything than think of him as well. And of course, I'm absolutely delighted that some years ago, the Institute agreed to have a Lighthill Thwaites Prize, which I think enshrines our history. Well, I will say something about being 100. It's very odd, actually, because when we were boys, we knew that the life expectancy was 67 for males, 67. And I was born in 23, so if you add 67 to 1923, you get, hands up? Well, the answer is 1990. So none of us thought we would get anywhere near the millennium. But here we are, and it's lovely to be here with you and all your people. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me. Well, I suppose I didn't have to be invited, did I? That's all.
Thank you very much. If you, maybe it's the, oh.
As a thank you for you coming today, we also have this for you. A little Klein bottle.
Oh, nice.
Very wobbly, I warn you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much indeed. Somebody knows. Read that out.
It says, Sir Bryan Thwaites, in celebration of his 100th birthday and tireless dedication to the IMA from the Institute of Mathematics and its applications.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sir Bryan.
You better help me down. I don't want to bust it straight away.
Okay. Okay, so as I said, if you looked on the older programme for the day, you saw that there was a little talk to be given by Paul Glendinning over lunch. The logistics of that didn't quite work out. And also, I should say, Paul sadly can't be here today, so we send him our best wishes. And he asked me to do it instead. So I've scrabbled together a speech. It was going to be a speech, but of course, suddenly at the last minute, I was demoted or changed to being here to say a few words. So I'm going to just look at my prompts on the speech, and if I get convoluted, then I hope you'll put up with me. Could I ask any of the technicians if I could just load my talk? Because I thought I would put a few slides together last night. if I would. So is there anyone in that little console coming to help me? Wonderful. So thanks very much. I have to find which one it is. So for those who don't know me, as I say, I was a past president in 2008 and 2009, and I'm renowned, infamous for the fact that on my patch, we tried to merge the IMA and LMS, which, as you know, failed at the very end. But hopefully we learned from it, and it didn't diminish our belief that we should try and merge our community together. Together we're better and stronger. And thanks to both of the talks this morning, and they sort of reinforce that idea that we really have a lot to offer. So, okay. So either of those top one or two. Okay, thank you very much. So I wasn't sure what my remit was. Paul obviously had an idea of what he wanted to say at a past president's lunch, what even one is. And am I speaking on behalf of the past presidents? But maybe before my talk gets up, can we have a show of hands for all of the past presidents in the room? If you would, please, identify yourself. So, fantastic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. Thank you very much. And so, not surprisingly, we're 60 years old, and there's been every president serves 2 years. So, not surprisingly, there's 30 past presidents. And by my reckoning, there's around 13 of us still in alive and kicking. And of course, Bryan is the senior amongst us. So I'm hopefully going to try and speak on their behalf and to say a few things about the way things have changed, to reflect backwards and forwards. Okay. So I was told by you, Joe, that Hannah's advice is not to talk about yourself, so I'm going to talk about myself. And just to say, I've been a huge fan of the IMA ever since I was in short trousers. Or in sort of 1982, I finished my PhD and was persuaded very soon after by Fritz Ursel and Neil Freeman, some of you will know those names, to join as an associate fellow. And then I carried on being an associate member, and I carried on because it was much cheaper until Douglas Jones, who was a president in 1998-9, said to me, it's about time you applied to become a member and not an associate member. So I begrudgingly had to do that. And then we know that the chartered mathematician came in the 90s, and I then thought that will do for something for my CV. So I stuck that on there as well. Okay, so let's move on. So this is our celebration. This is the present. So we're marking, as has been said a few times now, 20 years of the early career mathematicians committee, 60 years of the IMA, and 100 years of Sir Bryan's reign on Earth and Light Hill's life since he was born. So what's going on at the present? Well, I have to highlight, which I'm sure Paul would have done, is that the IMA has every few years reflects on itself and has a strategy review. So they've just gone through a strategy review exercise, which is really a big job, and it takes on board the efforts of dedicated IMA officers, counsellors, staff, others. And the review directs the IMA in its thinking for the following 5 years, usually. So what's on the strategy review this time? So advancing the mathematics profession and achieving our mission. And down there are a few points about achieving the mission, creating a sustainable IMA future. So the IMA has to be strong and successful if it's going to do anything effective. and Mathematics for Societal Challenge. So these are all worthy, and if you look in the fine detail, you see the sort of emphasis in this towards certain aspects. Equality, diversity, and inclusion is very important and is becoming to the center of most organizations. Sustainable future, collaborative working cultures, etc. And they did a poll, I believe, before this, and one of the things that came up is that everyone who belongs to IMA feels that we are a very strong and supportive community, and I would echo that. I think it's the most fun I ever have at meetings, council meetings, when I come to IMA events, because we all are passionate in our belief to help society at large and mathematics in the small. In that strategy review, which I would urge you all to read, it's not the most exciting, but it's important. They acknowledge threats and uncertainties, such as open access publishing, which means the revenue to the learned societies go down from its publications. But David Uden's in the back there, the former executive director, and we know only too well we've been talking about this problem for 30 years, but we still managed to do okay. So I'm more optimistic than some. Rising costs are an issue, inflation, everything else. But there's lots of opportunities as our changing society. But I think things have moved a long way from the original concept of the IMA, which Sir Bryan and Sir James thought about. So this goes right back to the start. This is just a little photocopy of the original talk that Sir James gave in 1962 in Bristol at the British Theoretical Mechanics Colloquium. Okay, and then it was used, his after-dinner address then was written up into this fairly short document, which then was presented for a discussion on Wednesday, the 3rd of April, 1963, at the fifth British Theoretical Mechanics Colloquium, which is now the British Applied Maths Colloquium, for those who don't know. So let's have a quick sneak at what was in it for all of you. A lot of words here, and I apologize for that, but let's just pick something out. Okay. He talks about it is appropriate also because of her economic position, Great Britain, depending as it does on exporting goods whose value bears the greatest possible ratio to the value of the raw materials of which they are made, etc. You could see what the emphasis of the thinking was. Industry was smokestack, was big industry, it was about exports, trade, making the difference by having mathematics input it. That's certainly true, and it was very valid. But society has changed. The nature of industry and commerce, business has changed. What of our massive exports now? Sale of insurance and other things. Applied maths can still play a role, but not in the way I think this conceived of the time. And then there's a mention here is also, as Professor Thwaites has so cogently pointed out, a source of severe shortage. So he points out that mathematicians are in short supply. We have lots of demands, there's lots of things we could be doing, but we're not large enough as a community and we should expand. Okay. Okay, and then he says, well, why don't we look at other institutes? And he mentions the Institute of Physics, which we know was a conglomeration of several institutes or societies to create something which was bigger than what had been in existence before. And in some sense, that's the academy model we're talking about today. But he was trying to do it, thinking about applied maths and its usefulness to society very broadly. And then at the end, he talks about having accreditation and qualification. So I think those are elements in that original model. Okay. And then let's move forwards 20 years. This is Nancy Lighthill, Sir James' wife, who was reflecting on the 20th anniversary. And it's a bit hard to read. So the first paragraph just reminds you of his background, that Sir James, as Sir Bryan will know very well, was very keen on pure mathematics, and he went to Cambridge with Freeman Dyson, Sir Bryan and others, and he was really only interested in pure maths, but the war got in the way, and he was persuaded, had his arm twisted, to start doing applied maths, and in particular Sidney Goldstein, who took him under his wing and saw what a talent he was. And then he did a lot of work at that time, which built his interest in aerodynamics, fluid mechanics more generally, etc. And then the second block is about the IMA. So she's saying here that the launching of the IMA in 1964 was an enormous part of his life. He felt that this was an incredibly important achievement. And I think he was always, as you say, very, very happy to see it do well and progress in the direction he originally conceived, and to be a broad church that included school teachers and people in industry, to form a coherent community thinking about the ways that we make society better. I think it's nice to see that. Move forward another 20 years, and we get to the IMA's 40th anniversary in 2004. And this one was in Manchester. And there's Tim Pedley, who was president at the time, presiding over the day of talks. And I just show it because, have I got a pointer? Because in here are topics which hadn't really previously been thought about: public engagement, mass communication, broader issues with dealing with societal problems, not just dealing with industrial problems. So we see this broadening, Marcus de Sotoy and Simon Singer there in particular. Okay, and I think Celia was there leading on discussion on maths education. Okay. And this was a sort of a discussion paper which came just to provoke people's thoughts during that 40th anniversary. And they talk about lots of things, about the changes in our society, the nature of industry, the nature of universities. In the 60s, universities were expanding. There were lots of new maths departments, wanted to train them. Getting new blood in there was an issue. Here, we're talking about problems in the university system, etc. So the IMA had to adapt to those changing landscape. But the bottom, it says that notwithstanding all those changes, the IMA is as relevant, and learners' societies in general are as relevant in the 2000s as they were back in the 1960s. Move forward another 10 years, and this is 2014, and then we had, for the 50th anniversary, we had a big bash, and it was a 2-day event. And we had an academic program on the left, which you can't read, is too small. But on the right, we had a festival of mathematics and its applications, where we had a load of school kids bust in for the 2 days to play games and to see what we all do in some way. It was a fantastic event, and Chris and Alan and loads of other people were heavily involved in the organisation. It was a very adventurous time, and I think it was a great occasion. But you can just see the headings here. A maths in a changing world, so it's about climate change, the drive for renewables. Maths in industry was still there. What has mathematics done for us was a half-day event, thinking about, again, maths and society. So it's this breadth that the IMA was trying to bring in. And then the other one was maths, I can't really read it, something or other at the top. Okay. Yeah, okay. So getting those in. And I think, again, Celia involved in that? Yeah. So it's maths education policy, etc. So again, it represents the breadth of the IMA. Okay. I have to interject here, not put in something about the anniversaries, but this was a 2010 event that I'm very proud to have been a small part of. This was also in Manchester, and this is the IMA's How to Talk Maths in Public, which Steve Humble, our great Chris Budd here, and a few others helped organise. And it was really to try and get the community to think about maths communication, popularisation of maths, thinking about communication of maths in all of its forms, radio, podcasts, everything. And this was in 2010, so it was quite advanced. We had a terrific time for 2 days, and so many of you will recognise all these people, many of whom were there for the sessions. Celia is in the background at the back, Matt Parker, with some hair there on the back on the right, Colin Wright. And we had this mystery figure that the cartoonist drew in to mean that you could be the next one. I think it goes without saying that Hannah is the person who's filled that spot since 2010. It sort of all, not quite as long hair, but it's sort of, I'm sure we could change that a little bit. But I think I'm proud of the fact that the IMA chose to do this, gave us the backing and the support. And this How to Talk Maths in Public is now spawned the annual event, now Talking Maths in Public, which Matt Parker and a few others have taken forward, I think is a real legacy of the IMA in doing this. Okay. And Steve Humble on the right, who did maths in the street, and there's our very own Chris Budd in the bath. And I think I was very pleased that we managed to get the caricaturist to do those as well. So I think you found your rightful place there, Chris. Okay. Okay, so what about the future? There's lots of changes, and Paul was keen for me to sort of impress upon you the idea of the IMA's thinking very seriously about itself and what its role is. But also, Peter Grimrod, many of you know, was a past president before me. He's very keen to make sure that IMA is much more open and out there and creating the sort of direction of travel for the whole maths community. He thinks we're a little bit too passive in a way. So I don't know why he's not here today. I was hoping that he would be able to impress upon us the need for thinking about a sort of manifesto. So what would an IMA manifesto look like? So that's really your job today, to think over lunch about what would be your 10 items for a maths manifesto and how we would be able to think about the role. And of course, the role is in the context of our sister learned societies, the IMA, the LMS, RSS, Operational Research Society, Edinburgh Maths Society, the Council for Mathematical Sciences, which may exist for longer or may become part of the Academy, and of course, the two organisations that I mentioned before, the Academy for Mathematical Sciences and the Knowledge Exchange Hub. So knowledge exchange is what the IMA has done to some extent or another. Industrial mathematics, links with industry. How does the IMA coexist with that as a separate entity? Well, you can see from Joe's discussions that the IMA members have been very, very key in setting up the K-Hub. So for many of us, we don't see a conflict, but it necessarily asks, what is our role within the IMA while we have an organisation like that? And the same with the Academy. The Academy serves the maths community as a whole to speak to government, to have a much higher profile than each of the individual learned societies can. So it has impact and it sets policy, So where does the IMA, which has legitimacy through its membership, feed into that? So that arrangement still has to be worked out. I'm sure everything is possible and we'll work through, but we just need to think through the implications of that. So let me just sort of finish with a few questions. So ask yourself, how has the IMA kept up with changing needs? So we see societal changes have happened. We've talked about communicating risk, understanding risk, fake news, AI, uncertainty, etc. How have all of those in society affected the way mathematicians think about themselves and their impact? And how is the IMAs going to achieve its ends? University landscape has more threats to it now than it did back in 2004 when we were talking about it. And Nigel in the audience has talked about maths desertification, where maths departments are shut down. Well, that's happening all over again. But not only maths departments, but universities are under threat of closure in regional areas. So the very opposite of levelling up. How do we as a society manage to deal with that and overcome that and make sure there isn't a desertification geographically of both mathematics at graduate level, undergraduate level, but also in schools, making sure we have proper math support. Big problems. Okay. What about goes into the undergraduate syllabus, the postgraduate, etc. syllabus? We know that mathematics, or applied mathematics as we conceived of it back in 1960s, has changed dramatically. Much more we think of, probability theory, statistics as part of the canon of applied mathematics, and in particular modelling and understanding the society. So have the degrees really kept up with that? I'm not so sure. And as I just mentioned, modelling, I think there's a really big problem that we've still don't do a good job with an effective understanding in our undergraduate community of what mathematical modelling is. And Chris, again, has been banging on about this his whole career. So I think we need to address that. I'll just end here. Last point, UKRI, which is the umbrella body with all the research councils within it, has come together. It sees itself much more as a unit than the separate EPSRC, SERC, etc. for funding. There's advantages in that, and there's great disadvantages. And if mathematics is not able to address these challenges, then it will lose out in terms of funding. I think it still has a problem within the community and within government of seeing the value of what we do, and we need to evince that. So stories, again, is what we do. So with that, I think I'll finish there, but just ask you to contemplate those questions and send any comments to Peter Grimlott in Oxford. Okay, I think I had a bit of time, but I'm happy to have a question because I think 12:45 was my upper bound for time. That would still give me an hour for lunch. So if anyone wants to ask a question, I'm very happy to answer it. Thank you. A motorbike with a sidecar.
Fantastic. Okay. Do we have any questions?
Very quick question, kind of following on from what Hannah just said. If you're here on your 100th birthday, what would you like the IMA to look like?
So that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think I've always enjoyed communities joining up. I think it's really important. So the IMA and LMS, to me, seemed a no-brainer that we could start that process. And even Sir James, in his original talk, talks about applied mathematicians being really contiguous with its neighbours, pure mathematicians, engineers, physicists. So I think he saw that as an issue. And I think the issue he had with the LMS was one that they didn't recognise what the IMA was trying to achieve. I think it does recognise that now. So in some sense, maybe the academy would be the end game, that we would have distinctive communities within the academy. I think the IMA is wonderful. It's perfectly formed, but it needs to be bigger. It should be bigger. And I think someone alluded to the question about when we take graduates go out into industry, they usually stop being mathematicians, don't they? We lose those people, and the CMath and another aspect, but to try and create a community of mathematicians, maybe the academy could be more successful at that. So I just see a bigger community that's much better joined up. And I think in 40 years' time, I think, where will the boundaries be between AI, data science, computing, physics, mathematics? Who knows? It's going to change.
This is a serious question. It might be direct. Is there a sort of branding issue with the word mathematics? Given that, there's so much sort of sexiness to data science and AI and kind of and mathematics doesn't have that same connotation. And you're asking about the future, and do we need to sort of look at that?
So that's a question for other people to answer, not me. It's an interesting question. I personally don't care about labels as long as we're successful. Call it what you like. But I think we need to have something which we recognise as includes us. Thank you. Yeah. So whatever it is, if we change it. The question was. It is okay. The question was, if you didn't hear it, Sir Bryan, was, should we change our name from mathematics to something else because it's a branding problem, because data science is so sexy that we need...
It's a no-brainer.
Off the scale. Okay. Yeah. So that's a good question for our lunch. I'm aware of time, so we probably should stop soon. Yeah. Thanks.
It's just a very quick one. That's a very key point. I mean, my worry is that we now have this phrase data science, which to me is an oxymoron. It's science or it's data. And there is a danger, because all the new top brains that would have gone into mathematics are just going straight into the digital sphere. And there is a danger that mathematical modeling, which we've always been emphasizing today, will fall away just because you can do massive data crunching on more and more powerful bits of silicon or whatever they happen to be in the future. And I really do see a problem of mathematics as a separate and foundational and key discipline in knowledge and the structure of the universe, and as a language, which also encompasses Boolean algebra and the logical and propositional calculus, which is the foundation of digital sphere. It's all mathematics. That might get lost. You might not get funding because the people who are in charge, they haven't got the brain cells. Let's just face it. They really don't have. If they did, they wouldn't go into politics. They'd go into mathematics and IT. Just one little anecdote. I did work in the same field as James Lighthill. In fact, half of my PhD work was reading everything he'd written up to that point. And after that, he wrote this amazing book called Mathematical Biofluid Dynamics. And he showed in that the work he'd done to show that the lunate tail of the shark and the dolphin was the optimum to give maximum impulse in the water. He showed mathematically why that was so. And I did a review of that book, actually for the Mathematical Association back in the late 70s. And I have all sorts of stuff on ResearchGate. But the one request I get once, twice a week is to say somebody's read my review of his book back in the late 70s on mathematical biofluid mechanics. That's how important that subject now is to the eco world. It's astonishing, and that's because he developed those models and solved the mathematics of it.
I mean, I completely agree with you, but I don't see a difference. I think you still need models in any way of interpreting the world, whether you use asymptotic methods, tropical geometry, AI, optimization methods. It's all the same underneath it all. We better stop there for lunch, hadn't we?